Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Insiders Talk brought to you by VPod, the podcasting club of IIM Visakhapatnam. Our guest for today is Mr. Sourabh Sengupta, the Vice President of Global Supply Chain at Glenmark Pharmaceuticals, an alumnus of FMS with over 2 decades of experience in supply chain with exhaustive exposure on demand and supply planning, distribution and delivery planning, and supply chain delivery optimization process across a diversified industry base of pharmaceuticals, automobile, and FMCG. He has worked with Cipla, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, Ranbaxy Laboratories, General Motors, and a lot more. He is also currently working on S&OP revamping project under RISE with BCG in association with Ranbaxy Laboratories. So our guest here is not only witnessed the evolution of supply chain management, but has also actively shaped its course with their innovative strategies and visionary leadership. So without any further ado, we welcome you to our podcast, sir.
I'm your podcaster, Sadanira.
And I am Mathangi.
So let's
Hi,
get started.
Sadanira Madhvi. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We welcome you. First of all, starting off, could you bring us back the memories of your MBA life and how it was as an experience for you?
So, not to take any inferences out of that, MBA life was full of fun. Full of fun means we never used to study, and the professors used to keep on hunting for us. But luckily, me and the weakest of the links for the class, we were amongst the placement committees. And so we put in a lot of efforts into the placements, and I think the first organization which came in, right, they shortlisted both of us, and fortunately or unfortunately, our project was in that particular organization, a summer project. So it was fun. MBA life was fun.
That's nice. Our placement people are also working very hard these days. Yeah. So starting off, given all your diverse industry experience, could you elaborate on a unique challenge faced in supply chain management across pharmaceutical, automobile, and FMCG sector? How do these challenges differ, and are there any common strategies that are universally applicable in all the sectors?
So, all the three sectors have wide variances with each other, the automobile, FMCG, and the pharma sector. And they are pretty complex supply chain in their own ball games. So if we talk about the automobile sector, if we talk specifically for a market like our country, India, right, it is on an evolving platform. But the major complexities ranges from the current supply chain paradigm is basically which platform to evaluate and further focus on. So the organizations, right, the car manufacturers or the automobile manufacturers are currently experimenting between the various types of fuels available in the market, right? With the government restrictions on diesel vehicles, right? With BS6 implementation across as a pollution norm for India, which is a pretty stringent norm for a market like India, right? So the engineering is taking a beat down as far as the Indian market is concerned, specifically if they have to follow the BS6 norms, right? They have to abide by a particular pricing standard, which is common in the India market. And also they have to curtail back the capacity of their engines, the horsepowers, the CCs, etc., etc. So in this particular paradigm, the supply chain manager, what happens, it becomes extremely tough for him to project the market as a whole. So the difference between the pharma market or the FMCG market and the car industry at this point of time is, in the car industry, the supply chain planner or the supply chain head finds it very rigorous to project the market in a developing market like India, right? Wherein he is unable to project the demand of a particular segment of vehicles, right? If it is some Tata, right, or some Maruti, their projections are pretty stable. Their evolvement is pretty stable, right? If you see, Tata has 2-3 top variants, right? You can say Harrier, Safari, etc., etc. And they have a particular fan base. Similar is the case with Maruti. They have a particular fan base in a particular economic zone, right? So that is pretty simpler. But when you go to complex organizations like Volkswagen, right? Ford has anyways exited India. If you go to Volkswagen, GM has already exited India because they are not able to bear the competition and the segmentation of the Indian public at this point of time. So apart from high runners, right? Mahindra, Maruti, Tata balance everything. Everyone has a problem with projectability. The demand projectability, and they're pretty confused on the segmentation, which segment to look for, and capturing what percent of market share would be a challenge. Would be a challenge, it would not be a challenge. And if you move back to the FMCG industry, right? In earlier days, what FMCG used to mean from a supply chain perspective was shifting of goods or finished goods from here to there. So FMCG was all about availability. So the better availability in your shelf, if you have a brand image, the products used to move. So FMCG till this point of time, as the years have progressed, it is more focused currently on brand building and availability to that brand building. New product launches for FMCG still remains a challenge based on the market share that new product is supposed to capture and what is the manufacturability or the availability of that new product across the shelf. For example, if you are trying to launch a new TV brand, right? Instead of white goods, I'm categorizing it as an FMCG, right? In this particular market, right, there's no segmentation of television at this point of time. People can buy anything. What an ordinary consumer like you and me will do, we will just go and look at surroundings, go to Amazon, right? Find out the price and go for the best suited for our purpose. So there's no segmentation, there's no brand following as such. So it becomes pretty difficult for the FMCG industry to take any FMCG environment, take consumables, perfumes, right? There's a lot of competition from the local players at this point of time. Sellers like Amazon and other online sellers, right? They tend to promote whosoever has a fair bit of rating and a fair bit of availability, right?
Yes.
And consumers are governed by those ratings and availability. So that has become pretty complex. So FMCG is all about that particular sector in which they don't have to have hardcore shops out there for their retail. They now tend to fully focus on these online stores like Amazon, Flipkart, etc., etc. So their supply chain is that, and pharma supply chain still thrives on international markets. To be very precise and fair, right? The biggest consumer of pharmaceuticals is US. Still at this point of time, US has been a biggest consumer for Indian-made pharmaceutical for the last 20 years now. And our markets like India, Asia, Africa, etc., in the pharmaceutical parlance are still evolving. They have still not gone completely to the lifestyle drugs. Consider a situation, and at your age or my age, if someone doctor tells you something, right? You have a high blood pressure, you have a high cholesterol. What will you first try to do as a considering an Indian mindset, right? You will try a remedy.
Yes.
You will go walking, you will go running, you will try a remedy. You won't just jump into lifestyle drugs. So that is the difference of consumer mindset between Indian market and the developed market. So this is in basically the supply chain complexities or in broad the market for FMCG, automobiles and pharma.
Right, sir. That was very simply put and easy to understand even for us. So coming on to the disruptions in supply chain, we've been hearing this term a lot. So supply chain disruptions have become more and more common, especially in these times where global events like Russia-Ukraine war and Palestine war, which is currently going. How do businesses build resilience to supply chain in such situations and unforeseen disruptions? And also, are there any specific risk management strategies that you would recommend for students to follow in future supply chain professionals?
Yeah, there's a traditional mindset on any of the unforeseen situation, or you can say act of gods, wars, etc., right? The traditional mindset is predictability, that you are not able to predict these accurately, right? Now, predictability has two aspects. One is when that event is going to happen, right? That is still visible. If you can still take some market information, right, you'll be able to know when that event is going to be visible. For example, take an example of COVID, right? The first COVID spread in China, and after that, it took nearly 4 to 5 months for that COVID to spread across the globe. So the spread of that event has a fair bit of lead time, right, when it percolated across the globe. But what we are not able to predict still at this point of time is the tenure of that event. How long is any event going to last? If you see the last war that is raging in the Russia one, right? Russia-Ukraine war.
Yes.
We have now stopped following as normal human beings what is going on in that war. Everyone has lost interest. Now, if we consider the tenure of that war, how that war has impacted us. So, I'll tell you the latest Israel situation. In our pharmaceutical parlance, right? Israel is a big manufacturer of capsules. You heard about empty capsule gels, right?
Yes.
And second, Israel is a major manufacturer of tubes. You must have seen ointment in the tubes, your move, etc. Right?
Yes.
So empty tubes, Israel is a major manufacturer and is a economic manufacturer of empty tubes. So let's take the example of Israel. What really happened in Israel? So if you see, because of cost-saving purposes, right? Because everyone is looking at economies of scale. A lot of organizations have migrated to Israel-based tubes because the earlier tubes which were sourced from China and more tubes which are sourced from Canada. In fact, Canada was earlier the major exporter of empty tubes, which we all used to procure from. Because of the economies, people have migrated to tubes based in Israel. Now, what has happened is, now there's no certainty. The tubes manufacturers are not having any issues in manufacturing, right? The manufacturing has not stopped. Consider this from a supply chain perspective. What has stopped is the logistics in between. There's no logistical connectivity. So it's a matter of time. Their manufacturing also dries up. Their inputs also dries up. They don't have any raw material to manufacture their tubes on, right? It's a matter of time. Now, you having an alternate source in supply chain is an extremely costly affair. It's not a simple affair because if suppose you are running an industry, right? If I come to you and I tell you that you are my alternate source, are you ready for that? The first thing you will ask is, if I have to sacrifice some of my capacities to you, right? What is the volume commitment you will be giving?
Right.
And in the normal span of time, I won't be able to give you any volume commitment because I already have a preferred source in place, right? Then we'll enter into a negotiation that, okay, the pricing of my preferred source is this, that, and we'll split the business. My overall business will be split in two parts. That part can vary 80, 20, 60, 40, 50, 50, whatever, right? Now you become a second source. Now what happens is, my first source, on seeing that his volumes have dropped, right, he will offer me some additional motivation by way of anything, right? By way of reducing his prices, etc., etc. So maintaining two sources is always a costly affair. First is on the supply chain end, second is on the cost front, right? And in pharmaceutical complexity, whenever you have to qualify two sources, it's not very easy to qualify, because what happens is, it's a very sensitive industry. Your tablet, capsules or ointment, whatever material touches it, right? If a strip is touching your tablet, right, you open that strip and eat the tablet, right? The ointment, the tube inside of the tube is touching that ointment, it will have to be loaded into stability. And that's not an easy affair. So whatever shelf life you're getting on the product, right, that shelf life is after loading it into that many years of stability. So developing a source is not a knee-jerk. Developing a source requires a lot of thinking. So alternate sources, basically in times of knee-jerks, for example, COVID, right? COVID lasted for quite some time, and China was the major element in which we used to import APIs. China is the major active pharmaceutical ingredient supplier across the globe. So at that point of time, if it comes to API, tube is pretty simpler. Whatever I said, that's a packing material, right? When it comes to API, which is an active pharmaceutical ingredient, you have to further experiment into that. You have to further load into that. You will have to take engineering batches. You have to put the API in a shop floor. So it's complex. It's not easy to develop an AVD or alternate source, because all the organizations have their financial restrictions, right, on developments. So predictability and acting on it, we predict 10 different things at different point of times that is going to hit our supply chain. But you have to pick and choose amongst those things to prioritize. So for example, this Israel thing, we immediately went back. We already had alternate vendors because Israel came in late, right? In the pharmaceutical part, we already had alternate vendors. Now we went ahead and strengthened our relations with those vendors, right? What I mean by strengthening the relationships is increasing their volumes, looking into their pricing partnerships, etc., etc. So it's not an easy theoretical element to have a alternate uh, entity in place, basically, for all these. Hope I have answered your question.
Yeah.
Yes. So moving on, since from whatever we understand that pharmaceutical industry, the pharmaceutical supply chain is quite known for its complexity, its regulations, and all the critical need for quality. So can you discuss some of the key challenges that you've faced in ensuring such a smooth and efficient pharmaceutical supply chain at Glenmark? And how have you addressed these challenges with some innovative solutions?
Yeah. So, just to give you a brief insight of pharmaceutical supply chain, every single element is governed by quality. So, pharmaceutical or any supply chain starts with demand planning, right? You plan the demand, you forecast the demand. Then there's demand generation and demand management, right? How much demand you have planned, how much you are able to cater, right, with your resources, that is demand management. And what is the priority, which market, which state, which region you have to prioritize your supplies. That falls under the periphery of demand management. Then comes under logistics. Then you have to import raw material, packing material for your own manufacturing needs, right, to cater those demands. Then you have a component of inventory, that is a safety stock, buffer stocks, whatever within the chain to cater that demand. Then you have a component of manufacturing, and between manufacturing, post manufacturing, there are components of quality involved into it. And then you have logistics, which takes you to the respective markets or countries, right? So this is the end-to-end chain. Therein you get draw your organization's revenue from that. So each aspect of this has a quality paradigm. So when we talk about demand planning, right, we must say that we would visualize, right, that demand planning doesn't have a quality parameter, but that's not correct. Even for entering certain markets, you have to go by the quality restrictions. For example, if I'm planning for a particular molecule, right? If my molecule, but when I'm talking about a molecule, it means a generic drug, right? Just so when we are planning for a certain molecule in a US market, you first have to ensure that that is passing the market's quality paradigm. You may be having that particular molecule in other markets, but that necessarily doesn't mean that you are eligible to market it within the quality norms to other countries. You're marketing a particular molecule in US, you cannot just as it go ahead and market it in India. It has a quality norm stipulated within it. So from demand generation, when you go to raw material, right, each of your raw material vendors is quality approved, visited, and so for example, you're a vendor to me, right? You have 5 molecules. You are supplying 5 APIs to me. All the 5 APIs will have to be quality approved. Your source has to be quality approved, and then only you'll be in a state to supply us. Then, when it comes to internal manufacturing, all the realms have quality testing involved into it. All the 5 stages of engineering or manufacturing have quality involved into it. Finished product goes through vigorous quality testing before it is released to the respective market. So within this quality framework, you may see huge rejections. Some of the rejections we call it as, in supply chain parlance, we call it as batch specific rejections. Some of the rejections we may term it as product robustness rejections, right? So whosoever is the supply chain planner or head, right, he has to go through and plan very carefully all these rejections. So rejections are not immediate. For example, you don't manufacture a drug and it gets rejected. In the span of time, right, rejection may happen today also, after 2 months also, because some products they have that kind of release time, right? They have to be put into microbial, they have to be put into various other quality testing, right? In between also you may get a rejection. So the major challenge which a supply chain professional faces is how to address that rejection, right? You may get a clue that this is not going very smooth. You have got an exclusion, you've got some kind of peaks in the testing process, right? You cannot just go ahead and plan a replacement for that because it comes at a cost. You will have to wait for the entire testing to get over, and you may plan based on your intelligence. You may plan some input materials. You may plan till the level of SFG. SFG is the semi-finished goods, but you may not go ahead and build additional inventory into the chain because it comes at a cost. So quality planning basically still is a major challenge for our kind of industry because it varies when compliances are so tight, and it also depends on the level of compliance that is incorporated by the respective geographies on pharmaceutical industry. So it varies and it's pretty tough to, you have to be always on your toe.
Right. So similar to quality, I think both automobile and pharmaceutical industry are also under increasing pressure to adopt sustainable and ethical supply chain practices. So could you share some examples of how Glenmark has embraced sustainable and ethical consideration into its global supply chain and the impact these initiatives have had on the business and its reputation?
See, for an organization like Glenmark, or take an example of any pharmaceutical organization which is a global organization, right? The correct quality parameters doesn't have any compromise. So even if an organization or industry wants, they are not in a situation to compromise a single percentage on the quality parameters. If a limit of if the parameter of a particular product is 92 to 95, even if it is 92, that is on border, and the organization has to let go of that particular batch. So the stringency, because people here, when they enter organizations like Glenmark, who have been more than 3 decades, right, serving the right. So in such organizations, basically quality is built to the core. The primary thing here is quality, and quality comes at a cost. But these organizations, or anyone who is operating in the pharma parlance, right, they have to consider the cost in their business model itself. So in this particular question, I don't think anything further could be added, but only thing is quality is uncompromisable in any of these organizations.
Right, sir. Earlier, we were talking about the demand side and the supply side of supply chain management. So we know that integration of demand and supply planning is vital for the efficiency of the supply chain management. Could you explain the significance of integrating these processes and share the best practices for achieving seamless coordination between demand and supply from your experience at Cipla?
Yeah. So basically, you guys must have heard about a phenomenon known as local optimization, right? So what is local optimization in the terms of from people orientation perspective is, when it comes to locally optimized, people and departments, they think only about their KPIs or individual KRAs, right?
Yes.
So what happens in standalone demand planning, supply planning? Demand planning is majorly concentrating on the products, their demand, fulfillment of their demand, and how that demand could be serviced to the extent of 100%, right? Supply planning, on the other end of the paradigm, they talk only about the supplies and how they can basically maximize to the demand. Now, what happens when they start operating on a standalone basis without any integration? The local KRAs come into the picture. So, demand, the force which the demand planning exerts, because the market and demand planning here is the same, right? The force on which the demand planning exerts on the back end, on the supply planning, manufacturing, procurement, etc., is to extract 100%, which is not always feasible, right? Because we have to consider a factor of constrained planning in current environment or in any environment. Basically, there are constraints which have to be considered and optimized completely. So when it comes to an integrated planning platform, right, this pull between the two agencies, the loss arising from this pull between the two agencies is somewhat mitigated to a considerable extent. So when I'm talking about a loss coming from these agencies, when it comes to individual KPIs, somehow this is a 100% pull and this is not able to supply to that 100% pull. What happens in the meantime? The organization loses. There's something in between which is not fully optimal. For example, you have 10 products, right? Demand planning says, I want these 10 products. They will not share any prioritization with you unless you have a robust SNOP and an advanced SNOP in place. And supply planning comes under the pressure to service the entire 10 products and fails in 2. So what happens? This particular supply planning is not aware on what's going on in the front end. This guy is aware on what's going on in the front end, what products he can manage without, what products he's not able to manage without, because the inventory keeping, or this guy is aware on what inventory he's holding and whether how flux is his forecast, right? This guy is not aware on how flux is this guy's forecast and what products he's asking for inventory, what products he's asking for current month sales, right? In this paradigm, he will supply eight products and say my hit ratio is 80%. This guy will carry 2 products which he doesn't need for immediate month sales, right? This is a complete loss to the organization. When it comes to an integrated supply chain planning, what will happen is you have end-to-end visibility across the chain. This guy will partner with the supply planning and he will try to optimize fully. He will talk about GC. GC means gross contribution each product has on the bottom line of an organization, right? When it comes to constrained resources, they both will come hand in hand and prioritize those constrained resources to derive 80% for the organization. Rather than in the earlier scenario, they lost nearly 20-30% for the organization as revenue. So this is the core benefit of having an integrated supply chain. Now what happens is, in an integrated supply chain, you cannot every time work on a forecast driven scenario. So wherever we have gone ahead and implemented integrated supply chain, it was part of pull and part of push. The forecast driven scenario is a push system, right? Wherein you are forecasting what you are not sure you will be able to liquidate or sell, right? And your forecast accuracy, even if it is 75%, 80%, which is the industry benchmark, right? Still you're losing 20-30%, and out of that 75% forecast accuracy, if the supply is able to supply you only 80%, then you're losing big time. So in an integrated platform, it's always the pull that works better with the push, right? So what is the pull system? You must have heard about the theory of constraints, right? What Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt propagated. So what the theory of constraints propagates on the replenishment model is the market pulls the finished products from the factory. There's nothing known as forecasting, right? On individual depletion, when your stock level started depleting from wherever zone you're maintaining the buffer zone, the manufacturing process will start. And there will be a buffer in between to cater your fluctuation. So that way, it's a win-win situation for everyone. You don't lose sale to that extent based on your forecast biases. And secondly, your supply biases, which are into the picture, have enough lead time for resolution. So and that is the core working methodology of an integrated supply chain planning, which I have seen.
Right, sir. Coming back to Glenmark, we know that they are one of the leading players in the generic medicine space. It has a focus on developing economies in India. Could you explain us what sets India apart from the other developing countries and economies, especially when considering some of the unique challenges our country might pose in the supply chain perspective?
So let's, whom do you want to compare it with? US? We can compare it with the US or Europe.
Sure, sir.
Let's compare India with the US, right? How the model is different. So US is basically an insurance-driven sector. So in the US, if you are working anywhere, if you are doing business anywhere, right, you will be insured.
Right.
And in India also we are insured. It's not that India, our organizations doesn't insure us, but there's a wide variance between both these insurances.
Right.
India currently, since it is developing, it focuses on the hospitalizations, the doctor fees, etc., etc. US, since it's a developed market, it focuses even on the medicines. So all the medicines which the US consumer buys on prescription are all insured. The insurance takes care of those medicines. So what happens is the buyer becomes a coalition of insurance organization. So if you see the retail out there in the US, the major retailers, CVS, Walmart, Walgreens, ABC, right? They are huge retailers. If you go to the US, you will see their counters, right? Those are immense. Even the medical counters, you can walk in from end to end. They don't charge the customers directly. it is through insurance. The customer will produce some prescription based on that, which they have to replenish. So the pricing war becomes severe when it goes to US. There are two aspects. One is who is paying for your medicines. Second is when we are paying for the medicines, we have to ensure that we are buying the medicines at the cheapest price. Right. Still, for India, if you compare the price range and the consumption between US and India, it becomes a very, very profitable and lucrative market, US, right? So the competition is humongous. How the US market goes on is you launch a product. For example, the GSKs of the world, the Mercks of the world, they will launch a product that is still not filed. That's an innovation drug. They will launch a product and they will enjoy certain years of exclusivity for that product. That's an exclusive product for that. After certain years, US government gives that exclusivity. You enjoy the exclusivity for 10 years. After that, it will be open for all the players. Yeah. Now, when we say open for all the players, all the other players will manufacture the generic version of that exclusivity, of that branded generics, right? And then the price war will start. Then all the CVS, ABC, etc. will come and bid. And the lowest bidder, and who can supply in the shortest frame of time, will get that business and he will start supplying. So this is basically the business, pharmaceutical business in the US, right? In India, basically it is prescription drugs, and you have to shell money out of your own pocket for these prescription drugs. In India, there are two kinds of medicines broadly, and just giving you a broad overview. One, the controlled drugs, which are price controlled drugs, which are controlled by the government of India. So government of India, every now and then they will take out a circular that these all molecules will fall into the category of price controlled drugs. So any organization won't be able to sell over and above the price which has been stipulated by the government, right? And also secondly, there's another legislation. Any organization won't be able to reduce their volumes for those drugs. So they have been supplying as per a particular volume, they won't be able to reduce those volumes. So that no profit making happens for those drugs which are life-saving drugs. Second is, you understand, right? Generics is currently starting in India. Still, the people or the consumer are not that accustomed to the generic medicines. They're still, for example, if you go, you will ask for Dolo, right? In the COVID times, we have all seen Dolo, how Dolo is. What is Dolo? Dolo is paracetamol. Very rarely people will go to the chemist and ask for a paracetamol. Very rarely, right? And as you graduate, same is with ibuprofen, same is with, you won't even remember the Vicks that you are taking, right? What is the generic name of that Vicks? No one knows that, right? Same, no one knows what is Move, that painkiller ointment which we use. No one knows. It's plain diclofenac. So no one goes, it's a phenomena of mindset change between these two markets. Once you go and ask the shop, right, you want diclofenac, he will give you 10 different variants. He will give you the cheapest version available. He can even give you a generic version. So it is the consumer which has to graduate. So this is the difference between India and US.
Then moving a little forward to the how the world has been changing. So there's a rapid advancement in technologies and how the role of these technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, data analytics has transformed supply chain management on a whole. So what opportunities or challenges do these technologies present for professionals entering the field of supply chain management today?
See, AI, everyone has started using AI, right? Basically, analytics, there is a huge scope and huge data available in all of the platforms for artificial intelligence. So when we talk about analytics, we start from demand, right? The market is filled with data. Now, the problem with using AI tools at this point of time, right, is organizations have that mindset to use these AI tools only for short-term benefits. They still have to develop that mindset that these AI tools can add to their top line. Currently, the concentration of AI tools is only on enhancing the bottom line of the organization. So you do understand the difference between the top line and bottom line, right?
Yes.
So current AI tools, they use for small projects like how do I improve the cost of logistics? how do I turn to capture further market share to a bit from competitors, right? These are the usage of AI tools which add to your bottom line. They reduce your inventory, they help you with logistics, alternate path, alternate providers, they help you with some of your vendors if you have alternate vendors in place. But there's a broader usage to the AI tools. Another problem is the market is filled with data. Now, which data AI has to be told on which particular data and which particular platform you have to source data from. You cannot source data from any platform because it will be junk. So when we talk about enhancing a top line for any organization, you can use data which is available in the market to the extent of market share. Currently, we use market share that, okay, the competitor has 20% market share, the competitor is out of stocks, right? So I have a time-based approach that I can take the market share of that competitor by selling more in this time zone, right? Because he's out of stock. That data is available in AI. Another set of data with the organizations are not looking for from these databases and not implementing artificial intelligence is how long will that stock out last? How will you get that data? That data is also available. Because any developed markets, whenever a competitor or any organization is going out of stock, he has to declare the specific problems, right? And he has to also tell the regulators that how long he will be out of stock. Because markets like US, they don't want to let their consumers suffer because of lack of medicines. So they are very, very stringent on organizations. If you are going out of stocks, you have to tell us by when you will be back. So all this data is readily available. You just have to use those data to try and focus on your top line too, rather than just being stringent and conservative and focus on your bottom lines. So that is what the fate of AI at this point of time is.
So that's really interesting. And so, on the same note, could you share some valuable insights or lessons that you have gained throughout your career, and you believe that these would be beneficial for those starting their journey in supply chain management?
Yeah. So I remember in 2006, right? In 2006, I was with DRN, and Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt and his team started a project in DRN. And that was the first time, I think he has written the book, The Goal, some years back from them. It was a curriculum in our times, I don't know now. Right. So he started propagating the theory of constraints to us. So it was so dynamic that no one believed in it, including me. So at that point of time, we were very habituated to working on forecasts. We were very habituated to forecasting and then starting replenishment against the forecast to build inventory against that forecast. We had a particular set of processes that was going smooth. What we didn't realize is there can be something in a much improved and improvised form than what we are following. So that is the advice to all of you. Whenever someone is coming out with something new, just drill deep and try to experiment as much as possible. That will help you grow. So what happened in that particular paradigm, I'll tell you. So it was about moving to a pull-based model from a push-based model, right? To a replenishment model. The second important factor which they implemented in a shop floor was DBO, drum buffer row. We used to call it simplified drum buffer row, SDBR. So we were very happy with our constraint. For example, another point of time, our capsule line was a constraint, right? And we were very happy about it. Okay, we can manufacture only to the extent of 100 million. We can't go higher, right? Till we are able to source a new machinery in place, right? They implemented that. We were blind about that. And we had a blind zone about that. We were very reluctant to bring in any new fundamentals that they taught us. But they went to the shop floor and they just told us that how much WIP or work in process material is waiting in front of that capsule line, right? It was nothing. No WIP was waiting, right? So what it meant was that you are not starting production till the time you optimally utilize this resource. So what the simple tone they told us is that you have to load this resource to the fullest and you have to be constrained around this resource. So this has to become your drum and you have to build a buffer around that. So at any given point of time, this resource should have 200% to manufacture. And this resource should be running 24/7. And that was a simple change, right, which we could have derived out of our common sense. And after implementation of the change, believe me, we went up to 130 million also. Earlier we were 100 million. 130 million in a month is 30% growth on your revenues without anything. So and that is the only thing. Just be open to all the elements which come to your fore, which are new, which may be new to you. You may love your work, but something else may be waiting which will be better for you.
Right. So connecting two different subjects here, how is the sales and operations planning process institutionalized and driven in collaboration with sales and marketing of a company?
Driven in collaboration with
sales and marketing of a company.
Yeah. So basically, sales and operation planning, right? The first entity which comes is sales, right? And then operations planning. So what happens is there's a fundamental known as focus forecasting. Okay, focus forecasting, what does it imply is a company's revenue and individual or sales revenue targets is something different, and what he's forecasting for is something different, right? So what usually happens is people forecast for inventory rather than the sales, right? So that is why sales and operations planning becomes a prime focus in all the organizations. Sales has their own task, right? They're supposed to sell, right? Operations has their own task. They're supposed to provide for what sales is going to sell, right? And there's a huge gap between sales and operations at any given point of time. What sales and operations planning in brief does is they put a cycle around this gap, or they put a constraint around this gap. If you're forecasting something, right, we'll attribute a value to that forecasting, and that is what you're supposed to sell, right? And whatever we are not able to provide, it will be a loss that will be removed from your forecast, right? So if you I just narrated you a small element by way of a KPI. This becomes a KPI. So what usually happens in sales and operations planning is you forecast for a particular terrain. You can say 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, right? That becomes your value. You will not be now reliant on your budget value. You will be reliant on that forecast value, and that will be presented to the senior most management of the organization. You start your planning from that. You start supplies based on that. And wherever you're facing a constraint, right? For example, I told you the constraint of a machinery or equipment which used to manufacture capsules, right? Now, capsules for 5 different markets are being manufactured there. If you don't have sales and operation planning, you'll end up responding to the noise from various markets, right? You'll try to prioritize on your own. First is, any constraint, you have to have a prioritization mechanism which has to be signed up by all the stakeholders. For example, I can give 100 million. My demand for this particular month is 200 million. I will give 100 million, but this is my prioritization criteria which has to be signed up by all, right? Which has been signed up by all. And some of the markets will have to go in for a sales loss. Some of the markets will have to operate with lower inventory. But that is what is the current constraint. If you don't have a sales and operations planning in process, your current constraint wouldn't be able to exploit evenly. For example, the 30 million ka gap hai, the gap of 30 million, if that gap you pass it on to the US market, you give 30 million less to the US market, you'll be able to derive $15 million lower, right? If the similar, you can give it to the India market, right? Because capsules has a different GC attached to this, bottom line attached to it. If you give that 30 million gap to the India market, they'll be able to survive with that. Overall, the organization will be benefiting, including the end consumer. Right? So this is in brief the sales and operation planning. Now you have to have solid tools to support this. Because if you just resort to prioritization mechanisms in Excel, it won't work. Here, I told you only about capsule machine. When you're running a 100 million plant, right? You have 10 different constraints. And this tool has to run for all the constraints. The tool has to be signed off. The output and input has to be signed off for all the constraints. And if you don't get it signed off by end-to-end supply chain, that is sales, operations, business, finance, and eventual supply chain planning and execution, you won't be able to exploit any constraint. Yeah. And eventually what will happen is, for lack of a proper sales and operations planning, your organization's profitability is going to suffer on a year-on-year basis.
Right, sir. Moving on to the end of our podcast, This is a necessary question in these days. So coming back to COVID pandemic, how has COVID pandemic impacted the global supply chains, and more importantly, what are some of the key lessons that can be learned in supply chain management from COVID?
Yeah. So two elements. One prime factor which is it has impacted is nothing is predictable.
Okay.
That mindset has come into people. Second is, do not put all your eggs in the same basket. Right. What happened is there was the country where COVID started. That was the country which suffered a lot. Right. And till the very end, that country had COVID in them. And unfortunately, that country is the globe's biggest supplier. Be it anything, consider it anything, right? So that particular aspect is currently clear, that at least for your key revenue generators for any organization, you have to have a plan B in place. Even if it is coming at a cost, you have to have a plan B in place. Second is the lead time of your plan B execution. For example, like we spoke about the Israel war, right? It was not predictable.
Yeah.
And the duration is also not predictable. The plan B execution of plan B has to be robust. For example, if you are loading a product in stability with a new vendor, right, you have 24 months of loading for the shelf life, right? You have to reduce it. You have means and mechanism by way of accelerated stability loading. In nowadays, you have to invest in technology with accelerated stability loading and various other technologies that are available, right? So only two elements. One is predictability is not always possible. So you cannot have the eggs in the same basket. You have to invest in alternates. Second is the speed of response. Whenever a pandemic hits us, how soon can an organization or a supply chain respond? Those are the two elements which I think I can.
Right, sir. So towards the end of our podcast, we usually have a segment of random question to end it on a light note. So we would like to know more about your hobbies.
My hobbies are reading. So basically, I practice Buddhism. It's not a religion. It's a way of life, right? It's Nichiren Buddhism. So I tend to read a lot. Wherever I get free time, I read into Buddhism topics.
That's a very interesting topic.
Right. I have seen that article on your LinkedIn page where you spoke about Van and how you connected that to life. It's really nice. It's very enlightening. And thank you so much. We will keep all the points in mind. As a fresher who's entering in the industry of supply chain, we'll make sure we'll keep our options open to all the new and upcoming events in the industry, and we'll promise to dig a little deeper and make sure that we get the crux out of it. Thank you so much,
Thank
sir.
you, sir.
Thanks, Atan.